This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Baruch Haba Rabbi Sai, Rosh Chodesh Elul, Aryeh Shag Milo Yira. When the lion roars, who is not afraid? Chazal tell us, Aryeh is Rosh Tevos, Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah. And I find myself always extremely frightened when it comes to Rosh Chodesh Elul. And so you think, I must be on a very high madrega, I must be a very big tzaddik. No, not at all. But I do have a lot of yira, Rosh Chodesh Elul, and that's because it's my wife's birthday. So, it is her. But anyway, Rosh Chodesh Elul is a frightful time. As they said, in the olden days, in Amaladik Tzaitin, the fish used to tremble when the Chazan would cry out, Rosh Chodesh Elul. So I just want to share with you a few brief thoughts and some ideas of what we should focus on during the month of Elul. So what we're going to learn tonight, much of it comes from a Sefer Eitzois, Lezakois, Badin, B'yomim Hanoram, Rav Chanoich Karlenstein. And let's begin by making a very interesting observation. And I have never seen this in any particular Sefer. The only time I ever saw this is in a Torah journal called Mevakshe Torah. And have never seen it anywhere else. And that is, we know that starting the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, we begin with by saying a parak of Tehillim, L'David Hashem Oiri V'Yishi. And the question is, why do we say L'David Hashem Oiri V'Yishi? Some suggest because Oiri, Chazal says Rosh Hashanah, Yishi is Yom Kippurim, Ki Yitzvaneni B'Sukkah, it refers to Sukkot, and therefore this kapitel sort of sets the stage for us in terms of how to prepare ourselves for this time of the year. Some suggest the word lule in Tanakh, it's one of the only words that has dots on top of it and the bottom of it, so that teaches you should flip it around. Lule backwards spells Elul. However, there's another very important reason that we're going to learn tonight why we say L'David Hashem Oyer V'Yishi in the month of Elul, and that is if you analyze, and again this is a very unique observation, if you analyze the parak L'David Hashem Oyer V'Yishi, you will notice that every single letter of the Aleph Beis appears in L'David Hashem Oyer V'Yishi, save one. There's one exception to that. The only letter that doesn't appear is the letter Gimel. There's no letter Gimel in L'David Hashem Oyer V'Yishi. Haloi Davarhu, what's the reason for that? Why has the letter Gimel been omitted in L'David Hashem Oyer V'Yishi? Okay, we all know probably the most famous remez to Elul. Last year, I believe we gave a shiur about different remazim to Elul. I think we had 40 remazim to Elul, if I'm not mistaken. But the most famous one is Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. I am for my beloved, and my beloved is for me. If I could take a moment to make a brief commercial, there's a sefer on Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur called The Mystery and the Majesty, published by ArtScroll, which is, of course, available now again during this season. And if anybody wants it, there's a special discounted rate, 15% off, and free shipping. So if you contact us, that is the deal right now. But we quote a chidah. The chidah is bothered why the Rebbeinu Shalom is referred to as Doidi, my beloved. Since when do we call God my beloved? Throughout Tanakh, God is called Lashem, Elokim, Lashakai, Litzvakois, Lakael. So when do we ever call him Ladoidi? Why all of a sudden Elul comes and Hashem is our Doidi? He's our beloved. Why reference Rebbeinu Shalom as Ladoidi? But be it as it may, and whatever the interpretation of that is, the facts are Ani Ladoidi V'Doidi Li is the most well-known and prominent remez to Elul. Elul, Ani Ladoidi V'Doidi Li. However, many overlook the next words of that pasuk. Ani ledoidi v'doidi li, I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me. What are the next words? Haroyeh bashoy shanim. The one who shepherds the roses. So somehow, these words must also be critical when it comes to Elul. The rose must be very critical when it comes to the month of Elul. You know, we learned by Parshas Ekev that you're supposed to start off a shiur with a joke, right? The Gemara in Shabbos says that, and Daf Lamed Amud Beis, the rabbi would begin his shiur with a joke, Milsa de B'dichusa. So a remez to that is, V'haya, right? The tzaddik of Ranana says, V'haya in v'haya ela lashon simcha. V'haya is a lashon of joy. Ekev! Rashi Tevos, koidem esek b'Torah. Before v'haya, you should have simcha. You should make a joke. Ekev koidem esek b'Torah. And if you do that, tishma and esam mishpat meila, then you'll understand the Torah. So I was speaking to Rav Eitan Feiner. So he pointed out that he once saw in the writings of Rav Shlomo Kluger that not only when you start a shiur, you should start with a joke. You should end a shiur with a joke also, because it says, Smeichem b'tseisam v'sasam b'vayam. You have to come sasim and you have to leave smeichem b'tseisam. You have to leave when you're happy also. So I asked Rabbi Feiner, where does this appear? He said he once saw it in the writings of Rav Shlomo Kluger. So Baruch Hashem, I went home and I instantly went through all the writings of Rav Shlomo Kluger. I said, how do you do that? Very easy. There's something called a computer. And of course, in the old Sidurim of Rav Yaakov Emden, very interesting, they publish a commentary of Rav Shlomo Kluger on the Siddur. And by the Keladain, on the words, Meichem V'Tzeisam V'Sasam V'Vayim, sure enough, Rav Shlomo Kluger says, not only do you start a shiur with a joke, you should end the shiur with a joke. So I sent it to Rabbi Feiner. And I said, Rabbi Feiner, when I speak to you, it's simcha, mitchila saviyat, the whole thing is simcha. But he was very happy to see it inside. But so I'm going to start off, we're talking about a rose, Ira. So we're talking about a rose today. And somehow the month of Elul is analogous to a rose. You know the story of this old couple in Miami? Ira, you know the story? Maybe you even know them. This old couple in Miami Beach, and they're going out to eat. And they were sitting next to another couple, and this guy was saying, last night I went to a terrific restaurant. It was great food, great ambiance. I just can't, he's having a senior moment. He can't remember the name of the restaurant. So he says, it has these red petals and a green stem. And his friend says, a rose. Oh, that's right. Rose, honey. What was the name of the restaurant? So that's what tonight's shiur is about, the rose. Okay? So, Haroya b'Shoshanim. Somehow, there must be a connection between the month of Elul and a rose. What is the connection between the month of Elul and a rose? So there's a Zohar HaKadosh. The Zohar HaKadosh says, Al tikri Shoshanim. Don't read it rose. Ella Sheshoinim b'Torah. Don't read it Shoshanim rose. Sheshoinim b'Torah. Shoshanim refers to those who learn Torah. This is what it means. Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. You want to be for God and you want God to be for you. What do you need to do? What do you need to focus on? What do you need to emphasize? The Beis HaMedrash, Shiurei Torah, Limud Torah, B'kiyos HaTorah, learning Sheshoinim b'Torah. That's the Zohar HaKadosh. Pretty amazing. So here we have, and Rav Aaron Cutler, now, would quote the Zohar, and he would say from this Zohar we see the Iker focus during the month of Elul has to be a strengthening in Limud Torah. Now I looked in the Mishnah of Rav Aaron, I didn't find it there, but Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, the chief rabbi of Israel, in his Musar Shmuzin, he quotes Rav Aaron. That's a good one. That's really beautiful. He quotes Rav Aaron. The Rav Aaron would say over this Zohar, Ani ledoidi v'doidi li haroya b'Shoshanim al tikri b'Shoshanim elo sheshoinim b'Torah. But then there's another comment on the Zohar. The Zohar says haroya b'Shoshanim. How many leaves does a rose have? 13 leaves. So you say it's not true because if you look it up, it only has 5 leaves on the top and maybe 7 leaves on the bottom. That's what it says in the great repository of information. That's what it says. So you say Google's allowed to be one off, right? They're one off. They got it. Really, they're 13, and they missed it by 1. But that's what the Zohar says. A rose has 13 leaves. Why? Corresponding to the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. But we could say a little differently, because we know that right before Psukei de Zimra, we say what is called Rabbi Shmuel Omer b'Shalish Esrei Midos HaTorah Nidreshes B'hem. So if the rose represents Limud Torah, Sheshoinim b'Torah, there's no wonder then that it has 13 leaves corresponding to the 13 midos that the Torah is expounded with. So the rose, if you want to think, what is the month of Elul? That month of Elul is the rose. Haroya b'shoishanim al tikri shoishanim ela sheshoinim b'Torah, and it has the 13 leaves corresponding to the 13 hermeneutical principles of exegesis, or in English, in Hebrew, right? Yugimol midah she'atar nidrashes bahen. So the rose represents Limud Torah. But isn't it interesting that you start Shacharis every day, right before Pesukei D'Zimra, you say the Yud Gimel Midos of Rabbi Shmuel? What are the Yud Gimel Midos of Rabbi Shmuel got to do with davening? I'm about to daven. Why would I say Yud Gimel Midos She'atar Nireshesem? I can understand before I open up a Gemara, I'm going to say Yud Gimel Midos She'atar Nireshesem. Why before I daven should I say the Yud Gimel Midos She'atar Nireshes Bahem? So we've explained over the years, from the Maggid of Mezrich, and the Malbim quotes an idea that the most important and straightest way to gain Rachamim and Hashamayim is through Limud HaTorah and through the Yud Gimel Midos She'atar Nidreshes Bahem. You access the Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim. Each one of the 13 principles of learning the Torah corresponds to a different midah of Rachamim. For example, the midah of Kale, which according to the Arizal is the first of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. How do you access Kale? By learning Kal V'chomer. If you learn Kal V'chomer, you access the midah of Kale. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu davens Hashem Kale na Rafan Allah. He is trying to invoke the midah of Kale. So God says, oh, you want to invoke the midah of Kale? Learn Kal V'chomer. And that's why you have a Kal V'chomer at the end of Behaloischa. Ve'aviha yarak b'faneha haloisi kalim shivas yomim. If her father would have spit in her face, Miriam would have had to be locked up 7 days. Now Miriam for sure needs to be locked up 7 days because I'm upset with her. So it's interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to invoke the midah of Kale, and God responded, you want to invoke the midah of Kale? Learn Kal V'chomer. So it comes out very interesting that the month of Elul is Haroya b'shoishanim al tikri shoishanim ela sheshoinim b'Torah. And amazingly, the rose has 13 stems. So one dimension of meaning is that by learning Torah, that is the surest way to gain Rachamei Shamayim. But besides that, there is a concept that perhaps the rose and its 13 leaves represents Yud Gimel Midos She'aTorah Nidreshes Bahen. So here we have many. When they enter the month of Elul and think, what do they need to do and what do they need to focus on and what should their emphasis be, sometimes we forget about perhaps one of our main avodas, and that is Limud HaTorah. If you look in next week's Parsha, Parshas Kiseitze, it begins with the episode of the Yifas Toyar, the beautiful woman that a person sees when they engage in war. And the Or HaChaim HaKadosh understands that whole Parsha is a mashal to the month of Elul. And the Yifas Toyar is a reference to a situation. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh says that the Parsha Yifas Toyar is a remez to a person's milchama with the Yetzer Hara. The Yifas Toyar is the Yetzer Hara. And if you want to fight the Yetzer Hara, what do? So the pasuk says, you have to go and v'yashva b'veisecha, sit in your house. And the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, what is this house the Or HaChaim HaKadosh says, what is this house that you need to sit in? The Or HaChaim HaKadosh says, this is the Beis HaMedrash. And it says, Yarach Yomim, you need to spend there. How much time? You need to spend there. Yarach Yomim, 30 days. This, says Or HaChaim HaKadosh, is a remez to the month of Elul. And the Or HaChaim HaKadosh explains how the whole episode of the Yifas Toyar is a remez to the process of tshuva, the milchama against the Yetzer Hara, ki seitze la milchama ala yavecha. When you go out to war against the enemy, who's the enemy? The Yetzer Hara. And how do you fight the enemy? You need to go into the house. What's the house? Says Or HaChaim HaKadosh. That is the Beis HaMedrash. And you need to cry and do tshuva. And it's certainly worthy of our attention. If we're talking about the process of tshuva, then why the emphasis on b'veisecha, which Or HaChaim HaKadosh learns the Beis HaMedrash? What does the Beis HaMedrash have to do with tshuva? We know tshuva is regret and vidoy, confession, and stopping to sin. But what role does the Beis HaMedrash have in the process of tshuva? So again, we see that Limud HaTorah and Chizuk and Limud HaTorah is the important emphasis that we need to have as the month of Elul comes. Yeah, but the Or HaChaim HaKadosh is saying the Iker Avoida in the month of Elul is V'yashva B'leisecha, is Liman HaTorah. In fact, where does the Navi directly tell us about Shuva? Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha. Return Israel. And what are the very next words? Kechu imachem devarim. And the Sifri Darshans, Ein devarim, ela divrei Torah. Devarim refers to Torah. So Torah is the primary manner in which we combat the Yetzer Hara during this time of the year. So it's interesting that the Sefer Eitzos L'Zakos B'Din tells us that the month of Elul is not only a month that we are to God and God is to us, but we have to focus on the end of the pasuk, that is Haroya B'Shoshanim, Al Tikri Shoshanim, Ella Shoshonim B'Torah, which is represented by the rose with its 13 leaves. Now, interesting, on this subject, we know that Chazal tell us in Rosh Hashanah Yud Zayin Amud Beis about the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, that Hashem promises us that anytime we invoke the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, Amar Rabbi Yochanan El Malei Mikra Kasav Yevshel Amrei, Hashem wrapped himself like a Shliach Tzibor, and he showed Moshe Rabbeinu the order of Tefillah, and he said, so long as the Jewish people sin, Yasu Lefanai Keseder Hazeh, they have to do before me this order, and I will be Meichalem. So we all know the power of Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. That is essential part of Slichos and essential part of Ne'ilah. However, many Svarim teach us, the Shla HaKadosh, the Tzrar Hamar, the Alshach HaKadosh, that if you look carefully in the Gemara doesn't say you should say the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. Because the question is, how often do we say Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim? Are we always answered? Can we take this promise to the bank? So if you look carefully in the Lashon of the Gemara says, Yasu lefanai keseder hazeh. You have to perform it, you have to do it. It's not enough to say it. If you scream on the top of your lungs, Hashem, Hashem, karacham v'chanon, but a person is not compassionate, a person is not slow to anger, so then it's not necessarily effective. It's only effective when you not only say the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, but when you follow suit. So it's interesting, it's brought that the Sefer Yismach Yisrael says specifically in the month of Elul, which Sefer should one learn in the month of Elul? Sefer Tomer Devorah, because this is a Sefer that teaches you how to emulate the ways of Hashem. And the Arizal teaches that the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim are very prevalent during the month of Elul. So now we're about to learn a second reason why we say L'David Hashem Oyri V'Yishi. The first reason is... The first reason, we said is Lule Hamanti backward is Elul, and we said Hashem Oyri V'Yishi is Rosh Hashanah, Elul, and Sukkot. Now we come to a new reason. The Hafla writes, if you count the number of times Hashem's name appears in L'David Hashem Oyri V'Yishi, there are 13 names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in L'David Hashem Oyri V'Yishi corresponding to the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim that are Meir during this time of the year. Yeah?
What's the connection of Haroy B'Shoshanim to L'David Hashem Oyri?
Okay, we're going to get to it soon. The Alshach HaKadosh.
Outside question regarding that. Why are certain people called HaKadosh? For example, why isn't Rab Meir HaKadosh? Some Sofer HaKadosh? We have real...
The Alshach HaKadosh, the Shla HaKadosh, Rashi HaKadosh.
No, Rashi no.
Sure. Or HaChaim. Rashi also gets one. You could put the Or HaChaim, the Arizal, and some put Rashi. Rabbeinu.
Why them and not all the others?
Why? So I'm going to tell you a big chiddush. I'm going to tell you a very big chiddush. Because they were very holy. It's a good kasha. Rav Meir gets his own sefer. I mean, he's not a... Good question. Okay, so... So Haroya B'Shoshanim. Haroya B'Shoshanim. Al Tikri Shoshanim Elami Shoshonim B'Torah. It's interesting that during the high holidays, during Rosh Hashanah, so you go to our friend Ari, come over to you, and I'm going to say, Shana Shana Tova u'mesuka. A good year and a sweet year. What exactly are we wishing each other when we say a good year and a sweet? If it's good, it's going to be sweet. What exactly are we adding when we say it should be sweet? Sugar is not a good thing. You know, sugar spikes your cholesterol levels. Sugar is the silent killer. You know, why are we saying it should be a good and sweet year? So Reb Tzadok HaKohen says, what is the sweetest thing in this world? Avada, the sweetest thing in this world is Torah. We're wishing people that their lives in this world, what sweetens life in this world? It's a very difficult life. Life is not so easy. There are challenges, there are vicissitudes, there are difficulties. What sweetens this world is when somebody learns Torah, it sweetens everything. So when we give a bracha, Shana Tova u'Masuka, Reb Tzadok HaKohen says we're wishing that a person's life should be infused with Limud Torah, and that will ultimately infuse their entire life with sweetness. So let me tell you about an interesting custom that the Chidushei Harim had the night of Rosh Hashanah. Many people, they stock up before Rosh Hashanah, they get their apple and they dip it in honey. Honey, of course, is Midas Hadin, by the way, because honey is red, or it's close to it. And they get their pomegranates, and they get their dates, but just make sure if you're going to buy a date, you could buy it, but you can't eat it unless you know how to check. If you don't know how to check a date, then this is not a good simon to start off the year by violating dozens and dozens of lavim. Within hours of the year, you've already consumed more worms than you did the whole year. So if you want to eat dates, you need to call up the Vad Rabbanim of 5 towns and be trained in checking dates. Otherwise, what you do is you buy the date and you make the hiratzain by looking at it. Because actually there's a stira in Shas. One place it says you should be ragal on Rosh Hashanah to eat the simanim. One place it says to look at the simanim. So from there we learn if you can't eat them, join them. If you can't eat it, look at it. Okay? And some people, they buy Merin, some people they buy raisin and celery, right? We know all the various simanim in Hagei Yisrael Torah. However, the Chidushei Harim had his own minhag, and that is he would begin the year by opening up a Gemara and learning Be'iyun. Because after all, what do we want out of the year? Well, we want a year full of honey, you want a year full of pomegranates, you want a year full of dates. Most people today don't even know what these are. Right? Fruits. You know what fruits are? Fruits are these things that people used to buy, like 20 years ago. But today people don't even know what fruits are. Except for Rosh Hashanah, they eat fruits sometimes on Tu B'Shvat. So the Chidushei Harim's minhag was the night of Rosh Hashanah, he would take out a Gemara and he would learn Torah Be'iyun because he wanted to make sure we know Simana Milsa. So if you eat a sweet apple, we believe it will have an influence on the sweetness of your year. If you eat a pomegranate or if you eat a date, it will influence the outcome of the year. So the Chidushei Harim says, what would we want more during the year than a year of Limud Torah, which Torah brings all the brachas in the world, which is Orach Yamim Bimina, U'Samoila Oisher B'Kavod. And therefore the Chidushei Harim would begin the year with Limud HaTorah Be'iyun, in-depth learning. Now, if you look throughout Shas, I always say there are 2 mitzvahs that always go together, and if you have one without the other, it's not enough. What are, friends, the 2 most important mitzvahs in the Torah? Now we know what the most important mitzvah in the Torah is. Talmud Torah, learning Torah, Talmud Torah Keneged Kolam. What is the second most important mitzvah in the Torah? The second most important mitzvah in the Torah is Gemilos Chasadim. There are about a dozen Gemaras in Shas that says, Kol ha'oisek b'Torah v'Gemilos Chasadim, you get this. Kol ha'oisek b'Torah v'Gemilos Chasadim, you get that. All the big brachas in the Torah is if you learn Torah and you do Chesed. For example, Ma yasa adam v'yinatza mechevlei shel Mashiach. What should a person do to be spared the birth pangs of Mashiach? The Gemara says, Yasek b'Torah uv'gemilas chasadim. So you'll ask a stira, but elsewhere in Masechta Shabbos it says, what do you do to be saved from the birth pangs of Mashiach? You eat 3 meals on Shabbos. Right? And the Gemara says if you eat 3 meals on Shabbos, you'll be saved from Gehenna, you'll be saved from the great din al Asalavai, and you'll be saved from Melchemes Gog Magog. So here it is, it's Shalashudis, and all of a sudden, this guy, even though in the morning he ate Kesudas Achashverosh B'Shaitai, all of a sudden he's not hungry. Why is he not hungry? Then he says, okay, I'll eat, but I can't wash. Why is it that washing for Shalashudas is like the hardest mitzvah in the world? The answer is, because if there's any place the Yetzer Hara wants a person to go, it's either Gehenna, or Melchemes Gog Magog, or the Yom HaDin Agada. I mean, these are three ways the Yetzer Hara wants to slice and dice a person. And the Yetzer Hara knows that the easiest way to get out of it is to wash for Shalashudas. So he says, you're too full. You once heard a shir that somebody once said you could be Yotze with learning. Nobody said, we don't paskin that way. The Shulchan Aruch writes explicitly that if you're able to wash and you don't, you're not Yotze. Even with Mezainis. Mezainis is you're only Yotze if you're so full you cannot down a morsel. But it's such an easy way, you have two options. You can either learn Torah and do Gemilas Chasadim, which is not an easy thing, or you could just wash and eat challah. So, Yetzer Hara said, oh, you're so full. It's amazing, the guy's so full, the second Shabbos is over, he consumes 5 slices of pizza. What happened? The answer is, because the Yetzer Hara is going to try his best to make sure that a person doesn't wash for Shabbos. But, putting that aside, those are the two ways to be saved of the travails of the end of days. Either 3 meals on Shabbos or Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. The Gemara says anyone who learns Torah and does Chesed will be Zoichet to the Nachal of Tu Shvatim. There are many, many Gemaras. The Gemara says, Kol ha'omer ein li ela Torah. Anyone who says, I only do Torah, I don't do acts of kindness, Afilu Torah ein la. He has nothing. It's not enough to learn. Your learning has to be accompanied by acts of kindness. You ready for this, Reb Chaim Vital? Reb Chaim Vital writes that a person at the end of every day, he has to say, woe to me if I let today go by without learning Torah or without doing a chesed. Every day of your life, you have to have learned something or done one act of kindness. So let's say you're about to hit the sack, and you realize, I didn't learn anything tonight. So of course, you have your Sfarim by your night table, like everybody does, and you quickly take out a Chumash and you learn one pasuk. You don't want the day to go. Then you say, I didn't do anything nice today. So you run downstairs and you wash 1 spoon. And your wife's going to say, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Did you bang your head or something? You say, I don't know. Don't worry about me. I'll be okay. Your wife's going to say, what's wrong? Why are you being so much chesed in one day? A spoon? It's amazing. Say, I'm turning over a new leaf, you could say. Every day you have to do a little learning and a little chesed. However, and in fact, the Gemara says in Shabbos, children came into the Beis HaMedrash and they said a drasha that even from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, there was never such a wondrous drasha. They said as follows: Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled. Aleph, Beis, learn Aleph, Bina, learn Torah. Gimel, Daled, Gimel, Dalim. Hey Vav, the name of God. That if you learn Torah and you do chesed, God's name will be on you. Says the Holy Chafetz Chaim. From here, from the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom alludes to Torah and chesed in the beginning of the Aleph Beis, the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit is Torah and chesed. Shema, yeah, look, we're not for b'di'evet, but yeah, the Gemara says. So it's very interesting. Torah always goes with chesed. However, in the month of Elul, of course we have to learn Torah, and of course we have to do chesed. But what is the main emphasis in the month of Elul? The main emphasis is limud haTorah. That's what we say in Little David. Acha shoalti me'es Hashem. One thing I ask of God. Oisa avakesh. That's what I'm seeking out. Shivti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai. To dedicate myself to limud haTorah. That's another reason to say LeDavid, because we need focus. We need to know what is the main primary avodah during the Chodesh Elul. So you say, I got to check my mezuzahs, and I have to check my tefillin, and I have to check. By the way, that's only to jug your mind, to check yourself. People say, I'm going to check my mezuzahs. Very nice, check your mezuzahs. If you check your mezuzahs and you don't check, wait a second. Do I look at things I'm not supposed to look at? Do I get angry when I'm not supposed to get angry? Then you're doing secondary and you're foregoing the primary. The primary avodah is to check yourself. But with all of that, what is the main avodah of Chodesh Elul? Acha sho'alti me'es Hashem, limud ha'Torah, haroya b'shoishanim, ani ledoidi v'doidi li, haroya b'shoishanim, al tikri shoishanim, elo mi sheshoinim b'Torah. And therefore, you know what letter is not in LeDavid? Gimel. Gimel stands for Gemilas Chasadim. As if to say, as important as Chesed is, and as much as we do need to do Chesed and Elul, but Acha Sho'alti Me'es Hashem, our focus is one thing. Don't lose the focus. Especially on Shabbos. We know, by the way, we're going to explain now why the Gra says that Limud HaTorah is the most important mitzvah. Let's say I help somebody for an hour and change their tire. So avada, every ounce of energy I exert is part of the mitzvah and expands the mitzvah and compounds the mitzvah. Or let's say I visit the sick and it takes me 5 hours. It's an amazing mitzvah, and every effort you put in magnifies the mitzvah. But at the end of the day, you did one mitzvah. When you learn Torah, the Gra has a chidush. Every word of Torah is a separate mitzvah d'oraisa. So the Chavetz Chaim has a cheshbon, and in 1 minute you could learn 200 words. So imagine one person helped someone for 10 minutes, that's one mitzvah. One person learned for 10 minutes, that's 2,000 mitzvahs. So just as a business investment, by the way, that's why the Gemara says in Brachos that how does a person get from the red to the green in terms of, we know that in Rosh Hashanah Hashem weighs our mitzvahs versus averos. The Gemara says the way to get from the red to the green is learning Torah. Why is that? L'chayra, you should be able to do any mitzvah. Put on tefillin. The answer is, if you're like 500 points in the red and you put on tefillin, so very nice, you're 499 now. Chavetz Chaim says, let's say a guy speaks Lashon Hara. Now every word of Lashon Hara is also an Aveira, Chavetz Chaim says. So the guy spends 10 minutes speaking Lashon Hara, that's 2,000 words, it's a problem. Well, right? You're in the red. So how are you going to overcome that? Limud HaTorah, because the only way you could sort of accumulate that many mitzvahs is through Limud HaTorah. So you'll ask, but I have this sefer, it's a very wordy sefer. The author throws in like superfluous words. V'hinei ha-mitzvah ha-gedoyla v'ha-gedoyla b'yoyser. So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky writes that only if the sefer is written concisely, where every word is meaningful, do you get schar for every word. So he asked Rabbi Yaakov, what's an example of a sefer that every single word is meaningful? He said, like Mishnah Berurah. So that word, obviously if you learn a Ramban, or a Rashi, or a Sfarno, or a Kli Yakar, or a Mishnah Berurah, or Shulchan Aruch, you learn the classic Sfarim, there, taka, every single word that you learn is a separate mitzvah. Comes Reb Eli Alapian, and he says that he heard from the Chavetz Chaim that on Shabbos is equal to all 613 mitzvahs. Every word you learn on Shabbos is equal to 613. So instead of learning 200 words in 1 minute, it's 200 times 613. Comes the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai takes us further. The Ben Ish Chai writes in Parshas Shemos that what a person could accomplish on Shabbos in learning is 1,000 times more valuable than during the week. This is quoted by Eitzos Lazakos within number 1 second paragraph. I'll read to you the words of the Ben Ish Chai. I once heard this quoted by Rabbi from Shiur. Gadol hapoyel hanifol me'esek haTorah b'Shabbos elef pamim min anasa b'choel. So think about it like this. You're about to go to sleep. So first of all, if you're having a hard time falling asleep, I'm telling you the best advice. Take a sefer. You'll be out within a minute, right? And you go to sleep with 200 words. And if you learn for 1 minute before you go to sleep, 200 words, 200 mitzvahs. And if you do that on Shabbos, what's 200 times 1,000? 200,000. Every minute you learn on Shabbos is 200,000 mitzvahs. Now I have a question. Imagine if you made $200,000 every minute. You would probably take a little bit of a shorter nap, I would imagine. If you were making $200,000, then maybe instead of, let's say, a 4-hour nap, you might want to cut it short, like only 3 hours and 45 minutes. This way, you could gain 15 minutes of learning. Each minute is another 200,000 mitzvahs. So the ikar, what we're learning is that an amazing secret, even though we've always focused on Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, I am for God and God is for me, but during this month of the year we also have to focus on the end of the pasuk, and that is Haroya b'Shoshanim, that the Zohar says Shoshonim b'Torah, that learning Torah is a very critical part of our preparation of Chodesh Elul, as evident from the Orach Chaim HaKadosh by the Yifas Toyar, that where do we do tshuva? It is very much in the Beis HaMedrash, that increased limud Torah is a very key ingredient. And therefore, in the capital of L'Davar Hashem Ori V'Yishi, where we emphasize, Acha Sha'alti Me'ez Hashem, God, I have it straight now, I know what I need to do. The letter that does not appear is the letter that represents the arrival of limud Torah, which is a very important mitzvah. And of course, during Elul, we don't overlook milas chasadim. And we need our healthy dose of that as well. But to emphasize the message of Acha Sha'alti Me'ez Hashem, the letter Gimel does not appear in L'Davar Hashem Ori V'Yishi. So, on this great night, the night of the first night of Elul, I bless all of you who've come tonight to start off the month on the best possible foot, by learning Torah not only by ourselves but barabim, because when you learn Torah barabim, everyone's mitzvah is compounded through the participation of everybody else. We should be zoichet that this should be simone milsa, that by starting the month of Elul with limud Torah, the Hashem should give us many grand opportunities to acquire zechusim, to come into the new year. Be'ezus Hashem, we should all be written nechtavim v'nechtamim b'sifran shel tzadikim for ksiv v'chsima tova. Thanks everyone for listening. Laila tov, and we'll see you next time. Shkayach.
Who was it?
The what?
Beis
Eli, right?
The Milas Chasadim could only add years
Yes.
on top of the Torah.
Right.
So you need
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.